Hi, this is Jeff Koper, and we welcome you to Disney Insights. Thanks for joining us. No parcel of land at Disneyland has had more title changes than this little wedge of Disneyland. It's perhaps the smallest land in Disneyland, but it has a history that goes back to nearly the beginning, and it's a history few know much about. Most know it as Bayou Country today, and many know it as Critter Country, home to Splash Mountain before then. But before that, it was Bear Country. And before that, it went for some time, not as Indian Country, but as the Indian Village. We look at all four eras, which include many well-known attractions, shops, and eateries. As part of our 70th anniversary of Disneyland, join us as we head into the backcountry to experience this very special corner. You'll learn some things you may never have known about this, the happiest place on earth. This podcast is produced by myself and Performance Journeys, which offers training, development, and consultant support to organizations big and small and entrepreneurs new and established. With a wide variety of resources and long-time in-the-trench experience, we offer workshops, online learning, coaching, and more to organizations that want to build their teams, improve organizational excellence, develop leadership, and create customer loyalty. Check us out at performancejourneys.com. And please support us by not only subscribing to this podcast, but offering up a rating, review, or referral to others. Make sure to check out Disney Insights, where we offer key points, photos, videos, links, and more that accompany this podcast. And in addition to DisneyInsights.com, our YouTube channel also carries our podcast. So please subscribe to that page as well, as it'll be more a part of our social media strategy moving forward. Thanks for joining us on whatever platform you enjoy Disney Insights. Well, let's move way back. The Indian Village was an opening day attraction, but it was situated between Frontierland Train Depot and Aunt Jemima's Pancake House, kind of between or behind the Plantation House restaurant. Photos taken of it during this time actually would show jungle foliage from behind it from the Jungle Cruise. After the opening summer, it was moved to a larger space, which is essentially where Bayou Country is today. It would move in 1956 and then again in 1963. It would end as the Indian Village in 1971, but in these decades, when the country was fascinated by TV shows featuring cowboys and Indians, this offered a much more authentic experience than could be found in most places. With animal hide teepees, birch bark longhouses, spears, and other representations, one could see some 16 tribes brought to life, to include Apache, Cheyenne, Winnebago, Hopi, Navajo, Maricopa, Choctaw, Comanche, Pima, Crow, and Pawnee. To access it after 1963, you passed by Fowler's Harbor and the Haunted Mansion, because the Haunted Mansion had been built in and around by 1963, but it would not open until 1969, just the house itself, not the show building. But you would pass by it in Fowler's Harbor, and then you would take the Wilderness Trail out to the back. It's how you got there in the early days, only it wasn't a trail so much as you traversed, or that you traversed once you passed what would become the Haunted Mansion. It was really a set of kind of two tunnels that went under a small hill. As it evolved, several features were to be part of this section of what was then considered Frontierland. The first of these was the Indian canoes. This premiered on July 4th of 1956, and while it has been renamed, it has been part of this section of land through all four versions. It is now known as Davy Crockett's Explorer Canoes. Originally called the Indian Store, but most people would know it as the Indian Trading Post. This title went on throughout the life of Bear Country. With Critter Country, it became known as the Brer Patch. Today, it is known as Ray's Berets. One more thing that occurred simultaneously is all of this, and in the guide maps, it's shown as actually part of this area of the park. Fowler's Harbor was used as a dry dock for Disneyland's Columbia ship and the paddle wheeler Mark Twain, and was dubbed Fowler's Harbor, and features a building known as Fowler's Inn. It is named after Admiral Joe Fowler, who helped Walt in overseeing the construction of Disneyland. The good admiral insisted that the rivers of America have a dry dock area. Walt didn't have the money to spend on it, but gave into the sensibility of it. In honor of him, Walt named it Fowler's Harbor. By the way, the trash cans that were actually in the Indian village at that time were designed to resemble tree stumps. They would eventually be relocated to the Fort Wilderness Resort and Campground at Walt Disney World. In a Reddit that asked the question, could something like the Indian Village ever be put into a Disney park today? One individual, Kambajamba, responded, quote, "It's definitely complicated to know that my grandfather was one of the original, quote-unquote, Indians working in this part of the park. By all accounts, it was as progressive as you could have hoped for, given the era, but still was more of a showcase of an imaginary past rather than a celebration of current and thriving culture. Would be cool to see it come back, but I agree with other posters. It would need Native community involvement top to bottom." End of quote. He also stated that his grandfather didn't feel like he was the target of prejudice. Chief Riley Sunrise was born in Anadarko, Oklahoma, hopefully pronounced that correctly, and was adopted by a Kiowa family. He lived at Second Mesa, Arizona on the Hopi Reservation and acted in several films before becoming part of Disneyland's Indian Village. In 1957, the Soviet press reported that Frontierland was holding Indians in captivity to amuse capitalist visitors. But Chief Riley Sunrise retorted, quote, "Captivity, my eye. How many Russians make $125 a week?" End of quote. Jim Korkis, legendary Jim Korkis, shared, quote, "Walt felt that the Indian Village was a celebration of the cultural heritage of American Indians, especially since his wife Lillian was born on an Indian reservation and had grown up in Idaho on the Nez Perce Indian reservation. Her father worked for the government there as a blacksmith and federal marshal. Lillian's mother enthralled Walt with stories of coming to the West in a covered wagon, including the Native Americans she encountered during that time. In 1996, by the way, Lillian Disney donated $100,000 to that tribe of Nez Perce Indians who were trying to buy some ancient tribal artifacts during that era. Certainly in the 1950s, quote, "Walt had quite a different approach to Native Americans than some of the other movie producers. In the Davy Crockett series, even though Davy is identified as an Indian fighter, he spends much of the series helping and defending Native Americans. Nearly 200 of the Native Americans that appear in the series were actual Cherokees from the Great Smoky Mountains, although they portrayed Creek Indians. This was quite a change from the typical Hollywood productions that were casting Italians and Hispanics as Native Americans." End of quote. By the way, if you ever have a chance to visit the Polynesian Cultural Center in Oahu, Hawaii, this concept of taking Native peoples and sharing their cultural experience is rooted in the idea of this Native American village, and actually was led by a former Disney leader. It has taken on a life of its own, and if you have never visited, it's one of the really great highlights of visiting Hawaii. But Indian Village was a unique experience and a unique time. Don't ever see that would come back the way it was. But, and again, I think for people, especially individuals like me in Arizona who grew up knowing about Apaches and Navajos and Hopis, we didn't have, and I don't want to stereotype Easterners, but we didn't have that that kind of throw them all in one lump sum group of people. We recognize that they came from very different tribes and reservations and so forth. And we learned a lot about their culture and ways. So this kind of reflection shown at Disneyland seemed like an extension of that kind of learning and maybe edutainment that would have been offered during that period of time. I don't remember it as a small child, to be honest, having experienced it, though I do know how I have had a large experience growing up around Native Americans as I spent my years in Phoenix growing up. Notwithstanding all of this, Indian Village was still something that was part of Frontierland. So when Bear Country opened, it became its own defined land, suggesting now a kind of fantasy place where animals came to life, as opposed to the mine train through nature's wonderland, where bears were represented more as being real. When Bear Country opened, that duo tunnel leading from the Haunted Mansion had been taken out, and in its place came a pathway with borders on each side of granite rock. The entrance to the land stated on kind of a national park sign, "Entering Bear Country, a honey of a place since '72. Permits must be obtained for tree climbing, fishing, scratching, and hibernating. Permanent residents accepted. No permit necessary for feeding bears. J. Audubon Woodlore, Park Ranger, and Ursus Americanus, Naturalist." By the way, J. Audubon Woodlore is being transformed into a car for the new Frontierland attraction here at Magic Kingdom, where the cars are doing kind of an outdoor road rally type thing. In the Nickel Tour book, it's pointed out that Bear Country marked significant deviation from the other lands in that the layout was kind of a broad, straight swath through the countryside, looking like it was carved with a truckload of dynamite. In their words, quote, "The roadway was urban renewal at its worst, and it was an unconvincing entrance to a bear's retreat," end of quote. Well, there may have actually been rhyme to the reason, however, as the parks were trying to get guests to go to this end of the park. And they weren't trying to hide the path. They weren't trying to make it a winding path. They were trying to make it clear, here's how you get to this end. And the design philosophy made it obvious about how to get there. At this point, gone would be the entire Indian Village. But in addition to the Indian trading post and the canoes, which remained, there were 5 new key components that defined this land, and continues actually to define this land to the present. Well, kind of. The first is the Country Bear Jamboree. At least the facility is still there. But back then, driven by the wild and woolly success of the Country Bear Jamboree in Walt Disney World's Magic Kingdom, this became the centerpiece of Bear Country. It was the hook that got you to go all the way to the back of the park. After all, the name Bear Country is just a reverse of the expression country bear. But here designers built not just one, but 2 theaters, thinking it would allow for twice as much attendance. That never happened, but this was still the centerpiece of this land. Designers got the idea of building 2 theaters because there were so many long lines waiting to go into the Country Bear Jamboree in Frontierland. But you got to remember that at the time it was built, there were no other attractions. There was no Splash Mountain. There was no Big Thunder Mountain beyond that. And so this was the end of the line there in Magic Kingdom, and people wanting to use one of their tickets ended up going to Country Bear Jamboree. It also sat a lot less people than, say, the Hall of Presidents or Mickey Mouse Revue. After a couple of years of opening, they actually downgraded the Mickey Mouse Revue because its attendance wasn't filling the theater, and they wanted to fill the theater more. But the fact of the matter is the theater for the Mickey Mouse Revue is massive compared to the more intimate space of the Country Bear Jamboree. But at that time, they all thought, well, this is popular. Maybe we should build 2 theaters. And that's how we ended up with that. By the way, Country Bear Jamboree was an ongoing show that is actually a show as well as the name of the band or the whole group. But a new show, the Country Bear Christmas Special, with new sets, decorations, costumes, debuted in November of 1984. And then the Country Bear Vacation Hoedown came around February 1986. And both were terrific shows. In fact, really elevated the whole Country Bear experience. Anyway, that was a key component. The next component that has, and these have all lived on, is a simple thing, the creek. A lot of people haven't thought about the fact that when you exit the Country Bear Jamboree, or now you exit the many adventures of Winnie the Pooh, you see this little falls, this little brook, which slips by, which kind of divides the border between where guests either went to the Country Bear Jamboree or many adventures of Winnie the Pooh and the rest of the land. And it just meanders through, but it really defines that natural look. Originally, that natural look was supposed to be the Northwest Woods, but notwithstanding, it is really a lovely element that has always been a part of this land since 1972. Also, Western-style edifices welcomed guests as they exited the Country Bear Jamboree. There were also separate edifices with restrooms, but in this period of time, the three connected buildings were connected. And in order to get there, you had to cross over the little creek with a small fall, and then go into the three buildings that were there. Let me talk about each of those clapboard buildings that were in the back of this land. The first of them was the mile-long bar. This was actually a fairly intimate space that was made bigger by illusion with mirrors that faced each other on opposite ends of the bar. This kind of mimics the original mile-long bar that was at the exit of the Magic Kingdom Country Bear show. It gave a more infinite view of this dining space with visitors that looked a lot like you when they bellied up in the bar because you saw your own reflection. Added to this were the talking, singing heads of Melvin, Buff, and Max. So you would see them at as you exit the show, they were above you, but as you emerged into the mile-long bar, they reappeared, and they were up there, and they actually were doing a whole routine that would rotate through over on top of the bar. So mile-long bar was one of the three spaces within these clapboard buildings. The second was Teddy Bear's Swingin' Arcade. Shooting galleries and arcade games were all the rage at Disneyland in these years. You would find them on Main Street, Adventureland, Frontierland, New Orleans, and after this one, eventually in Tomorrowland. What made them interesting is that Imagineers would create arcade games that would be themed around Country Bears. That would all close in 2002, but there are still references to it on the side of the building, and also a reference to Teddy Bear in particular behind the Country Bear Jamboree. You can actually see her swing in the back and an image of her on the back side of the Hungry Bear Jamboree barbecue restaurant. Speaking of such, another aspect of Bear Country was the Hungry Bear restaurant. This was a beautiful location that offered hamburgers, shakes, and fries. Unique when it opened was the idea of adding Canadian bacon to the burger, kind of similar to what you see in a McDonald's Egg McMuffin, but with the burger instead. I'd never had Canadian bacon until I came to the Hungry Bear restaurant. And usually I grabbed some fries and a shake and really headed from there to the real feature of this location, which was its two-tiered deck that overlooked a quiet corner of the rivers of America. Here the ducks were plentiful, and guests were really happy to try to feed them. It was beautiful. It was serene. You could watch the Mark Twain, or you could watch the keel boats or the canoes or the Columbia ship. All of them took their turns going down the river. It was really one of these, again, quintessential Disney moments that I remember as a child. I usually always did one meal at the Hungry Bear restaurant because I just loved the decor and the setting in which you were there. I should mention one other aspect that was there, and it still remains there, was the railroad trestle. Um, when you look down to see the creek that kind of passes by, intersecting that, you look up to see the train, the Disneyland train, which emerged from a tunnel and came across the land via a bridge, and then disappears again behind the Hungry Bear restaurant. All of these elements have really created what we know as, whether it's Critter Country or Bayou Country today, all these elements have remained over the years. Now, with Critter Country, well, that's where we bring in Splash Mountain. That whole space was fairly empty at that time. Well, Disneyland was the first with a steel roller coaster in the form of the mighty Matterhorn. It was Knott's Berry Farm who was really first to come up with how to do the definitive flume ride. In our previous podcast where we talked about New Orleans Square at Disneyland, we also talked about its roots with the Chicken Plantation restaurant and that competition that was kind of occurring a little bit between Knott's and Disney. One of the places that shows up is that they were actually very much at the forefront of having their own version of an Indian village at the park. But another big component, and mind you, I've also talked about, I believe with Frontierland, I talked a little bit about the Calico Mine Train ride and how it kind of informed the design of Big Thunder Mountain, the idea that you would go inside the mountain and so forth, but in this case it would be a roller coaster. Well, the year 1969, when the Haunted Mansion was built, it opened on August 8th of that year. But just prior, on July 11th of that year, Knott's had opened up its Calico Log Ride, which was this big log flume experience in a mountain with these, I would not call it audio animatronics, but you would see these people working and sawing the logs and so forth. And it was a heavily themed experience for a flume ride, because most flume rides, even flume rides after that, I remember Magic Mountain's first flume ride, it was just simply a track that went up and then over and then down. It was very simplistic. But the one at Knott's was themed in the form of this mountain. And for many years after this was built, operations knew that the guests were enjoying the flume ride at Knott's Berry Farm. Moreover, they needed another major e-ticket attraction, particularly in this area, and they knew that guests would love an experience that would leave them soaking wet during the hot summer months. So there was a lot of pressure on what was WED, or Imagineering as we know them now, to create a great flume ride for Disneyland. But what would be the theme? I mean, they couldn't just copy the timber mill thing that Knott's had put in place. Meanwhile, there was another problem that Imagineering was working with. Tony Baxter had been trying to figure out what to do with an attraction in Disneyland, or in Tomorrowland, that had well run its course. It was called America Sings. It was created in time to celebrate America's bicentennial, 50 years ago. And the idea was it would replace the Carousel of Progress that then moved out to Walt Disney World, which is finally being remodeled this next year. There were scores of animal characters that had been developed for this attraction. And so the thought was, what could be done to utilize these animatronics in the future? Because there just weren't a lot of people going through the Carousel of Progress anymore. Well, the answer came to Tony as he sat one afternoon in traffic on the Santa Ana Freeway. And the thought was, what if we were to create a flume attraction based on Song of the South and then incorporate all those animatronic characters into the ride? Well, this is how Splash Mountain was born. Actually, initially, it was called by other names like Zippity Doo-Dah River Run, but Michael Eisner noted Space Mountain and Big Thunder Mountain and Matterhorn Mountain. Perhaps it should be called a mountain as well. Hence, Splash Mountain was born. Splash also came from the new film Splash, which had been fairly successful in the box office at the time Eisner came in to the company. Splash Mountain was truly one of the most clever designs ever created for an attraction. For starters, the exterior built on the impressive concept that was built on at Knott's of creating a mountain structure to largely hide the flumes, but it was so much more than that. The layering of grasses and the sense of rock work that would give you a sense of truly finding something in the South was really brilliant and beautiful design. And once you plunged into this experience, you are brought into a completely different world. It is truly one of the most immersive experiences ever designed. Whether the track layout features Tales from Brer Rabbit or Tiana, it is truly one of the most clever layouts imaginable. In fact, it was for years my absolute favorite attraction, Splash Mountain. Whether I was at Disneyland or Walt Disney World, and when people ask, what is your favorite? It would be Splash Mountain. I would say that consistently. And by the way, it's even more so at Tokyo Disney Sea, where they bring that whole mountain concept into Grandma Sarah's Kitchen, which is an accompanying restaurant. Very cool and very well maintained. But perhaps one of my most horrible experiences I ever had was when I was actually doing programming for the Disney Institute, and I ended up doing a backstage tour one morning before operations took over of Splash Mountain. And that and going backstage to Pirates of the Caribbean was one of those moments that the magic kind of fell away, because it was always such a mystery how these things were so integrated. And by the way, you couldn't go online and see a printout of the blueprint back in those days. That just wasn't something you could see back then. I kept thinking that this thing, which seemed to continually plunge into the bowels of the earth, really, actually, when I realized, never went a foot underground. It was brilliantly clever in its design, and I had been fooled by its design for so many years. Even with the massive addition of Splash Mountain, it is astonishing that little of Bear Country was taken out. Even the Indian trading post at that time was kept with its grass-style roof. Only the restrooms on the back end were removed, and what would be changed would be the title. Since the land was no longer exclusively about bears, the name of the space was changed to Critter Country. Fast forward here, it didn't take long to realize that a country bear show was still not enough to bring traffic all the way to this corner of the park, even with Splash Mountain added to it. They wanted something else added. And in April 2003, a major change came to the land. Gone was the Country Bear Jamboree, and in its place came the many adventures of Winnie the Pooh. While the Country Bear Jamboree was not unpopular, it seldom filled to capacity on a continuous basis, with the exception of peak hours during the day or peak times during the year. Different versions of the show themed to Christmas and vacationing in the summer were added, but none of those quite did the trick either. Bear Country was still a fairly quiet stretch of the park, with the exception of people in line to go on Splash Mountain. So the idea of building Splash Mountain came with the idea of changing from Bear Country to Critter Country, adopting all the animals that would be found in this land. This probably created an upsurge in attendance, but it never still met operations expectations. Visitors to this land were usually no more than about 2% of the remaining park's attendance. When the many adventures of Winnie the Pooh opened at Walt Disney World's Magic Kingdom in the mid-90s, it quickly became popular. No surprise, it was in a very perfect position in the park to have long lines. And it's not too surprising because Winnie the Pooh was actually one of Disney's most successful pieces of merchandise, brands. One of its most successful brands. It rivaled and at times beat Mickey Mouse in merchandise categories. Disneyland operations saw this as a terrific way to boost attendance in this corner of the park. So the Bears of the Country Bear Jamboree headed out to make room for Winnie the Pooh. Now note that the great compromise during this era was to remove Mr. Toad for Pooh at Magic Kingdom and to remove the Country Bears for Pooh at Disneyland. That way, at least one version of this attraction would remain in at least one park. In this case, Mr. Toad for Disneyland and the Country Bears for the Magic Kingdom, where it began. Still, that was painful for many on both coasts. And in truth, the Winnie the Pooh attraction at Disneyland is really a beautiful attraction, while the Magic Kingdom version is clever with its flood sequence. Placed somewhere that wouldn't require the removal of something else, it would have certainly been even better received. The combination of these two things certainly elevated attendance to this corner of the park, but it was still a dead end. So probably one of the final big things to occur during this era was not any addition to Critter Country itself, but to build out Star Wars Galaxy's Edge on the back end of Disneyland. The completion of this in 2019 now allowed guests to not dead end at Critter Country, but to completely go around the rivers of America. Unfortunately, there were two casualties of this. First, though huge efforts were made to improve the look and experience, the rivers of America were made shorter. Second, in order to add a pathway through to Galaxy's Edge, the riverfront patio seating at Hungry Bear Jamboree, where you could just throw a fry over the edge to the ducklings below, well, that became receded and all went back in favor of the path cutting through. Those actions forever changed the nature of this quiet corner of the park. It was now as much a part of the heavy flow of guests that one finds at Disneyland. So now we get to Bayou Country. Bayou Country comes courtesy of Tiana's Bayou Adventure. Forget that Winnie the Pooh was still down the lane. The intent of this land was to extend the Louisiana experience from New Orleans Square into the Bayou. And other than Pooh, that kind of makes sense here at Disneyland. Not that it didn't happen to some degree with Splash Mountain. Tiana's is still controversial, more than a year after opening. We've spoken extensively about it when it opened, both at Disneyland and Walt Disney World. It has so much going for it, especially for really working to tie it to New Orleans Square, which we covered in our last Disneyland 70th podcast. But it also brings a difficult comparison to its former owner, Splash Mountain, which by any creative measure was a hallmark and milestone in Imagineering design. The most awkward aspect of Bayou Country is Winnie the Pooh. One could squint a little with the idea of a teddy bear in Critter Country, but Bayou Country, it feels all the more awkward. Strangely, the concept of country bears, which was taken out for Winnie the Pooh, seems more appropriate than ever. Perhaps that's why the Hungry Bear restaurant has been renamed to be the Hungry Bear Barbecue Jamboree. And with it comes some light theming and reminders of this land's own heritage, to include musical songs being played in the background. In summary, when we think of Disneyland, this area of the park isn't at the top of the list like Main Street, Fantasyland, or Adventureland, but it has a heritage that makes it very much a part of this Magic Kingdom's landscape here in Anaheim. Hard to see where the future of it lies. It's a small territory for sure. Still, one that works to create or help create the happiest place on earth. Hopefully this podcast made you realize that, yeah, you need to go check out Disneyland. If you haven't been to Bayou Country or to all the different lands of Disneyland, which we cover here in the 70th anniversary. And by the way, we're trying to really catch up because we really want to cover a whole new set of themes going into 2026. So, with all this, just let me tell you, David and Leah with Zenola Travel know Disney in ways few do, and they can make your next trip on land or sea an exciting one, or at least one that would be a lot less stressful. So be sure to contact them as you explore your next vacation, whether it's a Disney theme park trip or a cruise or an adventure by Disney. There is no charge to utilize their services, but it will save you enormous time getting all the details right. And with their insight, you can be assured you're going to experience the best trip possible. Contact them today. For those of you who follow us here at Disney Insights, may I recommend our books, A Century of Powerful Disney Insights, 100, The Walt and Roy Disney Years. This is an opportunity to look at the life of Walt Disney and learn some best Disney-inspired ideas for you in your own life and your own organization. Check out that book. The Wonderful World of Customer Service is the definitive volume for people who are looking to figure out how to deliver a great customer experience to their customers. That is comprehensive, and you want to definitely check out that book. And then for those of you who are looking to just build your own ability to be a better leader, Disney Leadership in You takes a look at the things that leaders need to do in terms of attending to results by effectively working with other people. We have great stories in it, all of which inspire you to actually be a better leader. Also, you may want to check out Lead with Your Customer, which not only includes lots of Disney examples, but over 100 different world-class organizations in the public, private, nonprofit sectors. This podcast and post is provided by myself and Performance Journeys, which celebrates more than 20 years as a training and development group, bringing best in business ideas through books, keynotes, workshops, seminars, and online tools to help you take your organization to the next level. If you want a keynote speaker, more than just nice stories, I offer proven insights and solutions that have worked in the trench, because I've worked in the trench with them, bringing these ideas to them. If you're looking for consulting, I've worked for decades across the public, private, and nonprofit arena. And whether it's classroom, online, or other resources, hey, we can help you to develop your leadership, improve employee engagement, customer service, create wow customers, all that. We do that at Performance Journeys. So please, hey, give me a call and let's talk about your needs. Finally, thanks for joining us for this podcast. Know that as in the title of Performance Journeys, it is as much about the journey as it is about performance. Find the second star to the right and keep going straight on till you reach it. Follow the compass of your heart and know that with a smile and a song, a little faith, effort, and pixie dust, your dreams can come true. After all, if we can dream it, we can do it. Until next time, bright suns. We'll see ya real soon.